Imagine standing at 1 Lodge Street, Asheville, North Carolina, on March 15th, 1930. It is morning, and the light is thin, more gray than gold, spilling across lawns that seem too perfect to belong to a world that has begun to come apart. The air tastes wet, like cold stone after rain. A faint mist clings to the trees, as if the mountains themselves are exhaling. Footsteps crunch on gravel. Voices gather in small knots, reporters, local officials, curious families, people who would never have been invited here in the old days. Ahead of you, through the gate and up the long approach, the house rises like a private kingdom. Not a home, a declaration. A 250-room French Renaissance chateau, 175,000 square feet of ambition, symmetry, and stone, built to be the most beautiful country house in America. It has 65 fireplaces. It has 35 bedrooms and 43 bathrooms. Even the banquet hall alone is a cathedral of appetite. 42 by 72 feet, soaring 70 feet high, where a table can run 40 feet like a polished runway for silver and crystal. And today it is for sale. Not the property, not the art, not the limestone walls, but the idea, the privacy, the illusion that wealth can seal a family away from the noise of history. A man at the entrance repeats the figure as if it's nothing at all. $2 for an adult, $1 for a child. $2 to walk into the dream. $2 to witness a fortress that has begun to feel, quietly, shamefully, like a trap. Look closely at the faces around you. The well-dressed ones are trying to appear casual, as if this is normal. The locals are trying to hide their awe. Some are already counting their coins twice, like they do at the grocer's counter now. Because after the stock market crash, money has become nervous, slipping away from pockets, disappearing from banks, turning solid lives into rumors. Somewhere inside that enormous house, a fire crackles. Because a place like this must always burn something, wood, coal, time, or the future. And that is the first cruelty of Biltmore. The mansion looks eternal, but its survival depends on something as fragile as a ticket price. How does a family that seemed to have everything end up opening its doors like a museum, while the nation lines up for bread? Hold that question. Hold it like a cold coin in your palm. Because the story begins not here in 1930, but decades earlier, when one quiet boy inherited a river of money and decided to build a mountain-sized dream to protect his soul. And fate, patient as winter, was already preparing the bill. George Washington Vanderbilt II is born on November 14th, 1862, on Staten Island, New York, into a family that has turned American industry into a private engine. His grandfather, Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt, had built wealth through shipping and railroads, turning steel tracks into arteries of power. But George is not the stereotype people expect of a Vanderbilt. He is not loud, that he is not the kind of man who bangs a fist and makes the world obey. He is contemplative, a reader, a traveler, a collector, someone who, even surrounded by abundance, seems to crave something money cannot reliably purchase: stillness. Picture him young, small hands turning pages in lamplight, the quiet scratch of paper, the smell of leather bindings and ink. Outside, New York moves like a machine. Inside, his mind builds private landscapes, forests, cathedrals, distant languages. He grows into a man who can read in multiple tongues, who finds companionship in books, and who watches society's glittering parties like someone standing outside a window. And yet, the Vanderbilt inheritance is still there, huge, humming, insistent. Wealth like that is not simply owned. It owns you back. It demands something in return, a monument, a legacy, proof that the fortune was not merely extracted from the world, but transformed into beauty. George doesn't want another Fifth Avenue palace. He doesn't want Newport's Coastal Theater. He wants a place of his own, somewhere the air smells of pine instead of coal smoke, somewhere the horizon is not blocked by brick and ambition. In the late 1880s, George visits Asheville, North Carolina, drawn, like so many wealthy Northerners, by the Blue Ridge's mild climate and dramatic vistas. And on that land, something happens to him that is almost dangerous. He falls in love. Not with a person, with a prospect. A view. I came to this spot and thought the prospect finer than any other I had seen, he would later say. Imagine the first time he stands there. Wind moving through the ridges, sunlight sliding across rolling hills, the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. It feels, at least to him, like a world before the world. A place where the noise of money might finally go quiet. So he begins to buy land. Not a few acres. Not a gentleman's farm. Something closer to a private realm. During his lifetime, his holdings would be described as reaching roughly 125,000 acres. A scale so vast it becomes hard to picture without losing your breath. It is land that includes forests, farms, hills, rivers, land that will require roads, workers, systems, water, and a kind of governance. It is a small country that must be managed. And here, the contradiction takes root. George Vanderbilt wants solitude, but solitude, at this scale, requires an army. Soon he recruits two of the era's great minds. Architect Richard Morris Hunt, born October 31st, 1827, who would die on July 31st, 1895, the preferred architect of America's elite, trained in the Beaux-Arts tradition, a man who understands that wealth wants to be staged. Landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of American landscape architecture, whose work can make nature appear effortless even when it is meticulously engineered. In the spring of 1889, Vanderbilt travels with Hunt to study manor houses and chateaus in England and France. Not as tourists, more like thieves of inspiration taking notes with their eyes. Stone staircases, tower silhouettes, carved ornament, roof lines that command the sky. And then, like a man asking older gods to bless his gamble, Vanderbilt brings them to Asheville and says, according to Olmsted's later recollection, something like, "Now I have brought you here to examine it and tell me if I've been doing anything very foolish." It's a line that feels almost tender, because beneath the money is a human fear. What if my dream is ridiculous? What if my dream destroys me? But the project moves forward anyway, because that is what dreams do when fed with fortune. Construction begins, described in Biltmore's timeline as beginning in 1889 and described in other records as underway in the early 1890s, moving toward what will become an astonishing 6-year undertaking. Hundreds of laborers, artisans, and skilled craftsmen arrive. Asheville changes. The sound of hammers becomes part of the valley's language. The smell of sawdust and wet mortar mixes with mountain air. Wagons creak under stone and timber. Men shout measurements. Tools ring. Horses snort in cold mornings. It is not merely a house being built. It is an economy being summoned. Biltmore becomes a magnet, pulling in talent, work, money, and attention. And while the mansion rises below the surface, cracks are forming, cracks that no one wants to see because the walls are so magnificent. George Vanderbilt stays nearby during the work, often at the brick farmhouse, a property he purchased in 1889 and had renovated. Imagine him there at night, boots dusty from the site, fingertips smelling faintly of paper and cigar smoke, a desk covered in sketches and letters, the dim glow of lamps, and in the distance the constant tapping of construction continuing like a heartbeat. He supervises. He cares. He is close to the details. And that closeness is a clue, because a man who truly feels secure doesn't need to watch every stone placed. By the mid-1890s, Biltmore's rooms begin to fill, not just with furniture, but with psychology. Every corridor is a thought. Every arch is a belief about what life should be. Every hidden passage is a confession. The house is designed for hospitality, yes, but also for control. And then, just months before the grand opening, Hunt dies in 1895. The architect does not live to see the finished spectacle. There is a quiet irony here that will echo again and again in the Vanderbilt story. You can plan a cathedral, but you cannot schedule your own heartbeat. In October 1895, Vanderbilt moves in, while the house is still not quite finished. Picture it, the enormous facade standing proud, but inside, the human mess of completion, tools, punch lists, sawdust in corners, workers still racing the calendar. On his first night, George Vanderbilt sleeps in the bachelor's wing because his own bedroom is not ready. And almost immediately, the house reveals an unromantic truth. Systems fail. When water is turned on in the stable to prepare for staff, it reportedly won't rise to the second floor where servants' rooms are. A pressure problem. A practical problem. The kind of problem that doesn't care about limestone carvings. The fix comes, the water flows, the world pretends it was nothing. But look closer. A house that large doesn't just require building. It requires constant winning. And no family wins forever. By Christmas 1895, Biltmore welcomes friends and family for the first time. Imagine the arrival. Carriage wheels on gravel, winter breath in the air, the smell of pine and firewood, lanterns glowing against stone. Inside, rooms open like chapters, one after another, each one insisting on its own importance. The banquet hall is a vertical statement. Height, echo, the faint smell of wax and roast meat, the clink of silver, voices rising and falling like music. In later years, formal dinners would run 6 to 10 courses: soup, fish, entree, roast, game, dessert, coffee, paired with multiple wines, with place settings that can exceed 40 pieces per guest. To dine here is to participate in a ritual that says, we are beyond ordinary life. But the house also contains something quieter, almost secretive, hidden doors. In the breakfast room, a concealed servant's entrance is disguised in the wall, so seamless that your eyes glide past it while admiring the art. In the library, hidden doors near the top lead to passageways connected to upper halls. In the winter garden, a trap door hidden beneath marble slabs allows plants to move between conservatory and rooms without disturbing guests, rarely opened, except for ventilation to the employee break room below. This is how luxury works. It erases the labor that sustains it. The guests see beauty. The staff sees logistics. And the family, if they are honest, sees both and wonders which side of the door they truly belong to. In June 1898, George marries Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, born January 17, 1873. She is described as lively, thoughtful, compassionate, someone whose warmth complements his intellectual reserve. Their courtship begins around society events in Europe, and soon she becomes the living heartbeat inside Biltmore's stone body. A year later, or perhaps in the early rhythm of marriage, the house becomes not just a monument, but a nest. In 1900, their only child is born, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt. Imagine Edith holding the newborn while sunlight spills through tall windows, dust motes floating in the air like tiny stars. Outside, the estate operates: dairy barns, farms, gardens, roads, employees. Inside, a fragile human life begins, unaware of what history will demand from her. These are the glory years. But every empire has hidden arithmetic. Biltmore is not just large. It is alive with needs. It requires staffing, heating, repairs, supplies. The constant replacing of things that were down simply because time touches them. A single fireplace is charming. 65 fireplaces are a discipline. And beyond the house, the land itself is a project. Olmsted's work is not simply decorative. It is restorative. Much of the purchased land is overworked, damaged, in need of rehabilitation. Vanderbilt invests in forests and farming and scientific land use. He becomes interested in forestry, so much so that Biltmore becomes associated with early American forestry practices. The estate's scale becomes both its pride and its vulnerability. Because what happens when the money slows? What happens when the world changes? At the peak of Biltmore's grandeur, you could walk room after room after room and feel as if you were moving through a mind that refuses to accept limits. Let's walk it together. You enter spaces designed not merely to impress, but to shape the psychology of everyone inside. The banquet hall is the most obvious, 42 by 72 feet, 70 feet high. Sound behaves differently there. A single laugh can bloom into an echo. Footsteps become formal. Even silence feels expensive. The air carries layered scents, Polished wood, old stone, faint smoke from a distant hearth, and the ghost of meals long finished. Imagine the table, 40 feet, lined with chairs, the soft scrape of fabric as guests sit, the sparkle of crystal catching candlelight like trapped stars. This room says, we feed not only ourselves, but our legend. And yet, it is also a reminder. The bigger the ceremony, the hungrier the machine behind it. From there, imagine drifting into the library, where intellect becomes a form of power. Here, the world narrows into the hush of pages and the soft rasp of turning paper. Above, the ceiling holds the chariot of Aurora, composed of 13 separate canvases, as if even dawn itself must be assembled in pieces and placed overhead. This room reveals George's truest self. The reader, the collector, the man who tries to build meaning in a world that worships money. But notice what's hidden. The passageways, the concealed doors. Even knowledge here has secret exits. Now imagine the tapestry gallery, stretching 90 feet. A corridor of woven scenes, color and thread, and history captured like a spell. Your fingers itch to touch the fabric, but etiquette forbids it. Your footsteps soften. The air smells like old textiles and careful preservation. A gallery like that is not merely decoration. It is a statement. We do not simply have wealth. We have time. And time, more than money, becomes the real Vanderbilt obsession. Beyond the formal rooms are spaces designed to soften the stone with nature. The winter garden, where plants and light attempt to domesticate grandeur. But even here, marble hides trapdoors, and below the beauty there are break rooms and ladders and the practical underworld of maintenance. And then there is water, always water, stored, moved, controlled. On the estate, there are reservoirs described as capable of holding millions of gallons. In the house itself, there is an indoor pool whose water capacity is counted not in buckets, but in the scale of small lakes. 70,000 gallons. Think about that. 70,000 gallons, resting silently inside a private home. A symbol of abundance so extreme it becomes almost abstract. And now ask yourself, what does it cost to keep silence over 70,000 gallons? Outside, the garden spread across 75 acres. There is a walled garden of 4 acres. There's a long approach road, 3 miles, that acts like a slow ritual of arrival, forcing visitors to prepare emotionally for what they are about to see. Biltmore is not only architecture, it is choreography. And for a while, the choreography works. Guests arrive in fine clothing, women in silks and satins, men in white tie, more formal than even modern tuxedos. Linen napkins are counted in the thousands, tablecloths in the hundreds, monograms stitched with the precision of devotion. Place cards and seating charts reflect a world where social gravity is measured like physics. In those years, Biltmore is a high altar of Gilded Age certainty. But fate does not care how high your ceiling is. On March 6, 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt II dies in Washington, D.C. at the age of 51, following an appendicitis operation, with reports describing a weakened heart afterward. Imagine the phone call traveling to Asheville. Imagine the silence after. The way a house like Biltmore absorbs grief, not with smallness, but with echo. Edith is suddenly a widow inside a palace built for a husband's dream. Cornelia is suddenly fatherless inside a world that had been carefully curated to feel safe. And the estate, this gigantic organism, does not pause. It still needs heat, still needs labor, still needs money, still needs decisions. Here, tragedy is not only emotional, it is logistical. Edith steps into leadership. She becomes active in service and civic life. She works in causes, supports community, and continues efforts connected to land and stewardship. She holds Biltmore together not merely with funds, but with will. But will has limits, because the world is shifting. Industrial fortunes are no longer untouchable. Taxes grow. The old social order begins to crack. And in the late 1920s, the crash arrives like a sudden winter. By 1924, Cornelia marries John Francis Amherst Cecil, an Englishman connected to British diplomatic life. Their wedding is grand, a final flare of old-world ceremony. For a moment, it seems like continuity. The Vanderbilt fortune merging with aristocratic tradition. The castle still inhabited, the family still protected by the thickness of its walls. But protection is a myth. The Great Depression does not knock politely. It arrives everywhere at once. And it turns even a mansion into a problem. Imagine being responsible for Biltmore in those years. The staff, the repairs, the taxes, the acreage, the barns, the gardens, the roads, the constant requirement that the machine must run. Now, add the national mood. Banks failing, jobs disappearing, people lining up for bread, cities desperate for tourist dollars. And then imagine the most painful realization of all. The house is too big to remain private. A family can live inside a small home and preserve the illusion that it is simply their life. But a mansion of this scale becomes a public fact. It becomes a regional economy. It becomes a symbol. And symbols are demanded, even when they bleed. So in 1930, the gates open, not for friends and family, for strangers. On that opening day, March 15th, 1930, an estimated crowd comes, and the entry fee becomes official. $2 for adults, $1 for children. Photographie arrive. Newsmen crowd the entrance. The mayor of Asheville is granted the first official access, and the event is framed as a triumph of tourism. But listen beneath the celebration. This is a family giving up something priceless, the right to be unseen. And once you become an attraction, you cannot fully become a family again. In the months and years after, visitors arrive in numbers, tens of thousands. They come from across the United States, from many countries. They walk the halls and stare at what used to be someone's living room. They imagine the Vanderbilts as characters in a fairy tale, forgetting that fairy tales require servants, coal, and endless expense. And here lies the cruel irony. A mansion built to escape the world becomes a tool to survive it. Cornelia and John Cecil attempt to navigate this new reality, balancing dignity with necessity. The estate transitions. The operation professionalizes. In 1932, leadership is established to manage the business structure of preservation and public access. But personal life fractures, too. Cornelia and John Cecil divorce in 1934. She leaves, taking her sons. She does not return to live there again. Imagine that, building your identity around a place and then departing it for good. A castle can be abandoned even if it still stands. John Cecil remains involved in management and life around the estate. Over time, Biltmore becomes less a private home and more an institution, an engine of preservation and tourism that must keep generating the money required to keep stone from turning into ruin. And now, return to that morning at the gates. The mist, the gravel, the coin in your palm. $2. It sounds small, but it represents a spiritual surrender. The family is not merely selling tickets. They're selling access to their myth. They're allowing strangers to walk into their most intimate spaces, bedrooms, halls, galleries, and turn private memory into public spectacle. And yet, what is the alternative? To let the house decay? To sell it away? To watch the dream collapse into rubble? Here, moral clarity breaks down. There are no villains, only flawed humans facing impossible math. Money could buy limestone and tapestries, but it could not buy a pause button for history. In the decades that follow, Biltmore's story shifts again, from crisis toward transformation. The estate continues as a working operation. Parts of its agricultural and dairy life evolve. Buildings find new purposes. The land itself is divided and reorganized over time, reflecting the reality that enormous properties must adapt or die. Later generations step into responsibility. In the mid-20th century and beyond, descendants continue the balancing act, preserve the legacy, modernize the business, protect the architecture, maintain the landscape, keep the doors open, because closing them would be another kind of death. And today, Biltmore remains what it has always been, a paradox made of stone. It is a monument to beauty. It is a reminder that beauty is expensive. It is an artifact of a time when a single family could build a private kingdom. And it is proof that even kingdoms must negotiate with the world outside their walls. Modern guests walk the same approach road. Those 3 miles of slow anticipation. They stand before the facade and feel small in the way architecture can make you feel small, like a whisper inside a cathedral. They tour selected rooms, admire the scale, photograph the gardens, breathe in the scent of flowers in the conservatory, and buy souvenirs. But if you listen carefully, if you let the narrator's melancholy wisdom guide you, you can still hear the older sound beneath the modern footsteps. The sound of a family trying to protect itself by building bigger and bigger walls. And discovering, too late, that the largest home in America is still not large enough to keep out time. So we return, one last time, to 1 Lodge Street on that March morning in 1930. The crowd moves forward. Coins change hands. The doors open. Imagine walking into the entry hall and feeling the temperature shift. Cooler, drier, scented with stone and polished wood. Imagine the first echo of your steps. How the house immediately teaches you that you are inside something designed to outlast you. And now imagine what it must have felt like for Cornelia, for John Cecil, for Edith, watching strangers enter, not as guests, but as customers, not as friends, but as proof that the old world is over. The tragedy is not that they opened the house. The tragedy is why they had to. Because in the end, Biltmore did not take everything from them in one dramatic blow. It took everything slowly. It took privacy first, then certainty, then the fantasy that money can freeze a life in marble. And yet, there is a strange redemption here. Because the house survives. The gardens still bloom. The rooms still hold their echoes. And the story, told honestly, becomes a lesson carved deeper than stone. You can build a fortress to protect what you love. Or you can build a cage. And sometimes they're the same thing. The last image is quiet. A long hallway. A tapestry's faded thread. A hidden door that looks like part of the wall. And the soft, continuous sound of footsteps, generation after generation. Walking through a dream that cost a fortune to create and a surrender to keep alive.